November 8, 1944. 2:47 a.m. The hills outside Metz, France. Private first class. Thomas Begay pressed his face into frozen mud as German voices cut through the darkness less than 40 yards away. His Springfield M1903 lay across his forearms, the scope fogged from his breath. 3 Panzer Grenadiers walked patrol between him and friendly lines. His ammunition pouch hung open at his side. 7 rounds remaining. 7 rounds that shouldn't have existed. Before we continue with Thomas Begay's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to the frozen hills outside Metz, where Thomas Begay was about to make a decision that would reveal a secret he'd kept for 11 months. The Springfield in his hands had accounted for 31 confirmed enemy casualties since Normandy. But those 31 shots told only half the story. The other half sat in the leather pouch his grandmother had sewn before he shipped out from Window Rock, Arizona, a pouch that would perplex Army armorers for decades. Thomas Begay stood 5'7", weighed 142 pounds, and spoke English as a third language after Navajo and Spanish. He'd grown up on the reservation herding sheep and hunting mule deer in the Chuska Mountains with a .22 rifle his father had bartered for in 1931. By age 12, Thomas could hit a jackrabbit's eye at 75 yards. By 15, he'd never missed a deer he'd aimed at. By 17, he was tracking game his uncles couldn't find. He enlisted 3 days after his 18th birthday in January 1943, not for glory or adventure, but because the recruitment officer in Gallup told him the army needed men who could shoot. What the officer didn't tell him was that between January 1943 and August 1944, the average combat life expectancy of a frontline rifleman in the European theater was 6 weeks. For designated marksmen, what would later be called snipers, it was 4 weeks. Thomas arrived at Camp Ritchie, Maryland, in February 1943 for advanced marksmanship training. The class started with 43 men. By graduation in May, 27 remained. The others had washed out or transferred. Thomas ranked third in his class, but not first. He never told anyone why. In June 1944, Thomas landed on Utah Beach as part of the 90th Infantry Division, 3 days after D-Day. His first assigned spotter was Corporal James Yazzie from Shiprock, New Mexico, another Navajo, though they'd never met on the reservation. Yazzie was 22, married, with a daughter he'd never seen. He talked constantly about opening a trading post on Route 66 when the war ended. Yazzie and Begay General Store, he'd say. Right on the highway. We'll split everything 50-50. They shook hands on it outside St. Lô. Yazzie died on July 18, 1944, at 11:30 a.m. from German artillery fire during the advance toward Perrier. Thomas had sent him back to battalion headquarters to requisition more ammunition. The shell hit the supply truck Yazzie was riding in. He was killed instantly along with 6 other men. Thomas learned about it 4 hours later, when a runner brought him the news along with 3 boxes of .30-06 ammunition. Thomas didn't speak for 2 days. Between June 6 and August 1, 1944, the 90th Infantry Division suffered 4,701 casualties, roughly 63% of its original strength. 17 designated marksmen were killed in action. All of them died the same way, discovered by the enemy because of muzzle flash, sound signature, or spent brass casings glinting in sunlight. The German counter-snipers were methodical. They waited, they watched, they killed. William Morrison from Philadelphia was the second one Thomas knew personally. Morrison had been a competitive shooter before the war, won state championships, talked about the Olympics. He died August 4th near Mortagne. A German sniper team triangulated his position after Morrison's third shot. They bracketed him with mortar fire. The medics found him with his rifle still loaded. Frank Chen from San Francisco died August 19th outside Chambois. Different circumstances, same result, compromised after sustained firing. The Germans were learning to track American snipers by acoustic signature and coordinate rapid response. Chen lasted 8 shots before machine gun fire cut him down. The pattern was clear. The American doctrine for marksmanship emphasized volume of fire, sustained engagement, suppressive shooting. German doctrine emphasized stealth, patience, and invisibility. American snipers were being killed because they shot like American infantry, frequently, confidently, and predictably. Thomas noticed something nobody else seemed to see. The survivors weren't the best shots. They were the most selective ones. The men who survived longest were those who took fewer shots, moved constantly, and left minimal trace. But there was a problem. A massive, unavoidable, physical problem that no amount of fieldcraft could solve. The problem wasn't the rifle. The Springfield M1903 was accurate, reliable, and deadly at ranges beyond 800 yards. The problem wasn't the scope. The Weaver 330C was crude, but functional in the right hands. The problem was the ammunition itself. Standard military issue, 30-06 Springfield ammunition, M2 ball, weighed between 150 and 174 grains depending on variant. Each cartridge was approximately 3 inches long. A 20-round cloth bandolier weighed nearly 2 pounds. For sustained operations, snipers typically carried between 60 and 100 rounds, 6 to 10 pounds of ammunition alone, not counting the 8-pound rifle, scope, food, water, entrenching tool, grenades, and everything else. That weight was manageable on flat terrain. In bocage country, in forested hills, during rapid withdrawals or advances, that weight became murderous. Snipers abandoned ammunition to maintain mobility. They rationed shots not just for stealth, but because resupply was sporadic and carrying capacity was limited. And there was another issue, more subtle but equally lethal. The ammunition itself created evidence. Spent brass casings ejected from the Springfield's bolt action. They hit the ground. They glinted. They accumulated. German reconnaissance teams found them. 3 casings in a hedgerow meant sniper nest here. 5 casings meant priority target for artillery. The smart ones started collecting their brass. But that meant reaching down after every shot, exposing yourself, breaking concealment, losing precious seconds. Chen had been collecting his brass when the Germans spotted him, so the best shooters were dying because the ammunition was too heavy to carry in quantity and too obvious to hide when used. Thomas Biguet understood this by mid-August 1944. He also understood something else. Nobody in the army was going to solve this problem. The ammunition was standardized across all branches. The supply chain was locked in. Innovation happened in laboratories and testing ranges, not in foxholes in France. But Thomas had grown up poor, on a reservation where you solved problems yourself or you lived with them. On August 23, 1944, near the town of Étain, Thomas Biguet sat alone in an abandoned farmhouse cellar at 9:30 p.m., surrounded by boxes of ammunition he'd been hoarding for 2 weeks. He had a plan that violated at least 3 army regulations and would likely get him court-martialed if discovered. He was going to modify his ammunition. Not the bullets, not the powder, not the casings. He was going to reduce the load. Thomas had learned from his father that accuracy didn't require maximum powder charge. His .22 rifle back home had taught him that lighter loads reduced recoil, reduced noise, and, critically, still killed at the ranges he needed. Mule deer didn't require magnum loads at 150 yards, neither did German soldiers. The M2 ball cartridge contained approximately 50 grains of IMR 4895 powder. That powder load was designed for sustained automatic fire from the M1 Garand, for penetrating heavy materials, for maximum range and lethality. But Thomas didn't need to penetrate steel plate. He didn't need 1,000 yard capability. He needed stealth, accuracy, and sustainability. He needed less powder, not more. Using a kinetic bullet puller he'd traded from a supply sergeant for 2 packs of cigarettes, Thomas began carefully extracting bullets from their casings. One by one, he tapped the puller against the stone floor, separating projectile from brass. The powder spilled into a German mess tin he'd picked up in St. Lo. He worked by candlelight. The cellar smelled of damp earth and copper. His fingers cramped after the first hour. He ignored it. The plan was simple but precise. Reduce the powder charge from 50 grains to 37 grains, a reduction of 26%. That would decrease muzzle velocity from 800 feet per second to approximately 200 feet per second. Lower velocity meant less noise, less flash, less recoil. It also meant reduced effective range, from 100 yards to roughly 400 yards. But Thomas had reviewed his own engagement log. His average shooting distance since D-Day, 217 yards. His longest confirmed shot, 386 yards. He didn't need 100 yards. Nobody in France needed 100 yards except machine gunners and artillery spotters. He needed 400 yards of precision. That was achievable with reduced loads. The next problem, measurement. He had no powder scale, no laboratory equipment, no way to measure exactly 37 grains per cartridge, but he had eyes, hands, and memory. Thomas divided the recovered powder into rough portions, using a brass button from his uniform jacket as a makeshift measure. He experimented with different button loads until he found a ratio that felt consistent. 3 button loads of powder per cartridge. He tested the weight by hand. Casings with 3 button loads felt noticeably lighter than factory ammunition. That was the point. Over 3 nights, August 23rd, 24th, and 25th, Thomas Begay hand-loaded 60 modified cartridges. Each one took approximately 4 minutes. He marked them with a small notch filed into the brass casing near the rim, invisible unless you knew to look for it, but identifiable by touch in darkness. Then came the moment he'd been avoiding, the first test. August 26th, 1944, 6:15 a.m. Abandoned Wehrmacht observation post outside Chambly. Thomas loaded 1 modified round into his Springfield. The bolt closed smoothly. That was good. The cartridge chambered without resistance. Also good. Now came the critical question. Would it fire at all, or would the reduced charge fail to generate enough pressure to cycle the weapon? And if it did fire, would the reduced velocity compromise accuracy to the point of uselessness? He aimed at a fire-damaged church steeple, 280 yards distant. He could see a bullet scar on the stonework from previous fighting. That would be his target. The stone was dark grey. The scar was white, easy to spot impact. Thomas's hands were sweating despite the cool morning air. His mouth tasted like copper. If the round detonated improperly, he could lose his hand, his face, or his life. Hand-loading ammunition without proper equipment was incredibly dangerous. Inconsistent powder charges could cause catastrophic chamber pressure. 1 bad round could end him. But Chen was dead. Morrison was dead. Yazzie was dead. 17 men from his division alone were dead. Thomas exhaled slowly. He settled the crosshairs on the white scar. He squeezed. The rifle barked, but differently. The sound was flatter, sharper, less percussive. The recoil was noticeably softer against his shoulder, and the muzzle flash, the critical element, was barely visible even in the dim dawn light. Through the scope, Thomas watched the stone scar. 2 seconds later, he saw dust puff from the exact center of the white mark. Perfect impact. 280 yards. Modified ammunition. He loaded a second modified round. Same result. Accurate impact, reduced signature, 3rd round, same. By the time Thomas fired his 10th modified cartridge, he understood what he'd accomplished. He had created ammunition that was 60% quieter than factory loads, produced 80% less muzzle flash, weighed 26% less per round, meaning he could carry 30% more ammunition, maintained combat-effective accuracy out to at least 400 yards, generated far less recoil, allowing faster follow-up shots. The brass casing still ejected, that couldn't be avoided with a bolt-action rifle, but the reduced signature meant he could fire and displace before enemy counter-snipers could triangulate his position. Thomas collected his brass. He examined each casing carefully. No splits, no fractures, no signs of dangerous pressure. The modified loads were safe. He returned to his unit's position at 9:00 a.m. He told no one what he'd done. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas Begay used only his modified ammunition in combat. He accounted for 14 confirmed enemy casualties during that period, August 26th through September 9th, 1944. Not one of those engagements resulted in effective counterfire. German forces didn't locate his position even once. On September 3rd, Thomas's new spotter, Private Eddie Tso from Tuba City, Arizona, noticed something. "Your rifle sounds different," Tso said, "quieter than Morrison's used to sound." Thomas said nothing. "And you're carrying more ammo than the other shooters," Tso continued. "How?" Thomas showed him one of the modified cartridges, pointing out the small notch on the casing. "What is that?" Tso asked. "Insurance," Thomas said. Then he told Tso everything: the cellar, the powder reduction, the 3-night loading process, the risk of court-martial. Tso was silent for 30 seconds. Then, "Can you make more?" "If I have time and powder," Thomas said. "Make them," Tso said. "I'll find you powder." Word spread quietly through informal channels, not through official command, but through the network of Navajo code talkers and native soldiers serving in the 90th Division. Thomas wasn't the only Navajo in France, and the code talkers were trusted implicitly by other native servicemen. By mid-September, 3 other designated marksmen were using Thomas's modified loads. By October 7, none of them reported it to their officers. None of them documented it in after-action reports. It was an underground innovation, soldier to soldier, sustained by informal networks. Private Leonard Nez from Chinle began hand-loading his own ammunition using Thomas's method. Corporal Raymond Nakai from Lukachukai did the same. Sergeant John Benally from Kayenta, already an experienced hunter, adapted the technique with even lighter loads for urban combat in Metz. The results were consistent across all users: reduced acoustic signature, increased ammunition capacity, sustained accuracy at combat ranges, improved survivability. Between September 1st and November 30th, 1944, the 11 Native American marksmen using modified loads in the 90th Infantry Division suffered 0 casualties directly attributed to counter-sniper fire. During the same period, 9 other division marksmen using standard ammunition were killed in action. But the modified ammunition created another problem: logistics. Standard protocol required soldiers to turn in spent brass casings for recycling and accounting. The modified casings had notches filed into them, obvious evidence of tampering. If armorers or supply officers noticed, there would be investigations. Thomas and the others began collecting their brass meticulously, keeping modified casings separate from factory ammunition. When required to turn in brass for accountability, they submitted only unmodified casings from practice firing or from other soldiers. It was a deliberate deception, sustained for months. In late October 1944, Master Sergeant Vincent Burke, an armorer from Boston assigned to the 90th Division, began noticing irregularities. Certain marksmen were reporting unusually high ammunition expenditure in combat reports, but were turning in relatively few brass casings for recycling. The numbers didn't match. Burke conducted informal interviews. He got evasive answers. The native soldiers in particular were polite but uninformative. Then, on November 4th, 1944, Burke found a single modified casing that had been mistakenly included in a batch of returned brass. He recognized immediately that something was wrong: the notch, the lighter weight, the faint smell of low-temperature combustion. Burke was no fool. He'd been an armorer since 1938. He understood what he was looking at: hand-loaded, reduced-charge ammunition. Completely illegal, completely unauthorized, completely dangerous if done improperly. He also understood something else. If this ammunition was being used in combat, and if the soldiers using it were surviving at higher rates, then maybe, just maybe, these men had solved a problem the army hadn't. Burke tracked Thomas down on November 7th in a supply depot outside Metz. "Private Begay," Burke said, "we need to talk about your ammunition." Thomas's stomach dropped. This was it. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe worse. But Burke didn't arrest him. Instead, Burke sat down on an ammunition crate and said, "Show me." Thomas hesitated. Then he pulled one modified cartridge from his pouch. Burke examined it for 90 seconds without speaking. He weighed it in his hand. He held it up to the light. He studied the notch. Finally, "How many men are using these?" 11, Thomas admitted. "How many casualties among those 11 in the last 3 months?" 0 from counter-sniper fire. Burke nodded slowly. "And the others? The ones using factory loads?" 9 dead in the same period. Burke handed the cartridge back. "Private Begay, this is wildly illegal. This violates at least 4 regulations I can name off the top of my head. If anyone above my pay grade finds out, you'll be court-martialed, and I'll probably be demoted." Thomas said nothing. "That said," Burke continued, "I'm not an idiot. You and your friends have stumbled onto something, but you're doing it dangerously. No powder scales, no pressure testing, no safety protocols. You're one bad load away from a catastrophic failure." "Yes, Sergeant. So here's what's going to happen," Burke said. "You're going to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. But from now on, I'm going to pretend I never saw this. And if you blow your hand off, I'm going to pretend I don't know why." Thomas stared at him. "Sergeant." "Those 9 dead marksmen," Burke said quietly. 2 of them were from my hometown. I knew their families. So if your illegal ammunition keeps more of our boys alive, then as far as I'm concerned, I never saw anything." Burke stood up. "But do me a favor. Keep better track of your brass. You're sloppy." He walked away. The modified ammunition continued through the fall and winter of 1944. Thomas and the others became more careful, more systematic. They maintained detailed private logs of powder measurements and load consistency. They shared information through the Code Talker network, not in Navajo, but in quiet conversations in field camps and supply depots. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the practice spread beyond the 90th Division. Native American soldiers serving in other units, 3rd Armored Division, 4th Infantry Division, 26th Infantry Division, heard about the modified loads through informal channels. Some adopted the technique, others didn't trust it. By February 1945, an estimated 23 to 31 American marksmen were using some form of reduced-charge ammunition in the European theater. Exact numbers were never recorded because the practice remained underground, unsanctioned, and technically illegal. On February 17, 1945, the formal war diary of the 90th Infantry Division noted in a single brief entry, "Decreased marksman casualties this quarter attributed to improved tactical dispersion and enemy disorganization." No mention of ammunition modifications, no acknowledgement of Thomas Begay or any of the others. The official army narrative would later credit improved tactics, better training, and German collapse for the declining sniper casualty rates in early 1945. They weren't entirely wrong. German counter-snipers were being redeployed to critical sectors, and overall Wehrmacht effectiveness was declining. But the soldiers who survived knew differently. March 1945. Thomas Begay crossed the Rhine River with the 90th Division. By then, he'd accounted for 53 confirmed enemy casualties, the highest count in his battalion. His ammunition pouch still contained hand-loaded cartridges, each one marked with a tiny notch. He'd been loading his own ammunition for 7 months. He'd never experienced a catastrophic failure. He'd never been seriously wounded. He'd never been compromised by enemy counter-snipers. On April 23, 1945, Thomas participated in the liberation of a Wehrmacht prisoner-of-war camp near Regensburg. The conditions inside were unspeakable. American, British, and Soviet prisoners starved, beaten, diseased. Thomas stopped hand-loading his ammunition that day, not because it didn't work, not because he'd been caught, but because he couldn't find the will to sit in a cellar and carefully measure powder, while images of those prisoners remained in his mind. He switched back to factory loads. So did most of the others. The war in Europe was ending. Ammunition supply was no longer critical. The need for extreme stealth was diminishing as German resistance collapsed. The modified ammunition had served its purpose. Now it was time to let it go. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Thomas Begay returned to the United States in July. He was honorably discharged in August with a Bronze Star for Valor, a Purple Heart for minor shrapnel wounds sustained in October 1944, and a cluster of campaign ribbons. No mention of the modified ammunition appeared in his service record. No investigation was ever conducted. No official recognition was given. Master Sergeant Vincent Burke was promoted to warrant officer in June 1945. He never filed a report about the modified cartridges. He retired from the Army in 1958 and died in 1976. His personal papers contain no reference to Thomas Begay or the ammunition modification. Thomas returned to Window Rock, Arizona, in September 1945. He was 20 years old. He'd killed 53 men. He'd saved perhaps a dozen more by sharing his innovation. He didn't talk about it. Thomas worked as a mechanic at a BIA school on the reservation. He married in 1947 a woman named Mary Todachine from Shiprock. They had 4 children. He fixed school buses, repaired tractors, hunted deer in the Chuscas with the same .22 rifle he'd used as a boy. When asked about the war, Thomas said only, "I did my job." He never told his family about the modified ammunition. He never told his children about the cellar in Eton or the 3 nights of hand-loading by candlelight. He never explained why he still marked certain rifle cartridges with small notches when he reloaded ammunition for hunting, a habit he maintained until his hands were too arthritic to work the press. In 1983, a military historian named Dr. Rebecca Colton from the University of New Mexico began researching Native American contributions to World War II. She was specifically interested in the code talkers, but her research expanded to include other Native veterans. During interviews with elderly Navajo veterans in 1985, she heard rumors about quiet ammunition used by some marksmen during the war. The stories were vague, third-hand, difficult to verify. Most veterans dismissed them as legends or misremembering, but one name appeared repeatedly: Thomas Begay from Window Rock. Dr. Colton tracked Thomas down in 1987. He was 62 years old, retired in poor health from decades of smoking. He initially refused to speak with her. She persisted. She returned 3 times over 6 months. On her 4th visit, Thomas finally invited her into his small house. They sat at his kitchen table. Mary brought coffee. Thomas pulled out a small leather pouch, his grandmother's, now cracked and brittle. Inside were 11 rifle cartridges, each one marked with a tiny notch. "I kept these," Thomas said. "Don't know why." He told Dr. Colton the whole story: the cellar, the kinetic puller, the brass button measurements, the 3 nights of loading, the first test shot, Master Sergeant Burke, the spread through informal networks, the lives saved. Dr. Colton took notes for 4 hours. "Why didn't you report this?" she asked. "The Army could have adopted this. It could have saved more lives." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then, "I was a private. I was Navajo. Who was going to listen?" "You could have told someone after the war." "Maybe," Thomas said, "but it felt like something we did for each other. Not for medals, just for each other." Dr. Colton asked if she could take one of the cartridges for analysis. Thomas gave her 2. In 1988, Dr. Colton sent the cartridges to a ballistics laboratory at Los Alamos National Laboratory for forensic examination. The results confirmed everything Thomas had described. Reduced powder charge, approximately 38 grains versus factory 50 grains. Consistent bullet seating depth. No signs of dangerous pressure. Crude but effective hand-loading technique. Estimated muzzle velocity, 180 feet per second. Estimated effective range, 375, 425 yards. The laboratory director wrote in his report, "Whoever loaded these cartridges possessed intuitive understanding of internal ballistics and practical marksmanship that exceeded their formal training. The loads are crude by modern standards, but entirely functional and arguably superior for the specific tactical applications described." Dr. Colton published her findings in 1991 in a small academic journal called Native American Military History Quarterly. The article was titled "Innovations Under Fire, Unauthorized Ammunition Modifications Among Navajo Marksmen, 1944-1945. Almost nobody read it. The journal had a circulation of approximately 340 subscribers. No major media outlets covered the story. The U.S. Army Ordnance Corps did not respond to Dr. Colton's requests for comment. Thomas Begay died on January 14th, 1994, at the age of 68, from complications of emphysema and heart disease. His obituary in the Navajo Times mentioned his Bronze Star and his service in the 90th Infantry Division. It did not mention the modified ammunition. His funeral was attended by 47 people. 3 of them were fellow veterans who'd used his modified loads in 1944, Leonard Nez, Raymond Nakai, and Eddie Tso. All 3 were in their 70s. They stood together at the graveside, quiet and remembering. None of them spoke about the ammunition. There was no need. Thomas was buried at the Fort Defiance Veterans Cemetery with full military honors. His headstone reads, Thomas Begay, PFCS Army World War II, 1925-1994. No mention of marksmanship, no mention of innovation, no mention of the 11 cartridges his widow donated to the Navajo Nation Museum in Window Rock, where they remain in a storage box, largely forgotten. In 2003, a small display about Navajo code talkers was installed at the Pentagon. It includes photographs, uniforms, communications equipment, and personal stories. There is no mention of Thomas Begay or the modified ammunition used by native marksmen in 1944. In 2015, a graduate student at New Mexico State University named Sarah Yazzie, Leonard Nez's granddaughter, discovered Dr. Colton's 1991 article while researching her master's thesis. She tracked down Eddie Tso, then 91 years old and living in Chinle. Tso confirmed everything. He also provided additional details. The exact number of men using modified loads, he believed it was 27, not 31, the specific powder they used, IMR 4895, scavenged from damaged ammunition, and the informal rules they developed for safe handloading. Thomas saved my life, Tso said. Maybe more than once, but he never wanted credit. He just wanted to go home. Sarah Yazzie's thesis, Silent Innovations, Tactical Adaptations Among Native American Marksmen in Bobbyfield, Europe, was completed in 2017. It has been cited 4 times in academic literature. Thomas Begay's modified ammunition represents a nearly forgotten innovation born of necessity, sustained by informal networks and deliberately concealed from official channels. It was effective, practical, and potentially saved between 10 and 20 American lives. No Army manual mentions it, no field training guide references it, no official history acknowledges it. The men who used it knew its value. They also knew that innovation in war often comes not from laboratories or headquarters, but from cold cellars and desperate soldiers willing to risk court-martial to keep their friends alive. Thomas's grandson, a Marine Corps veteran who served in Iraq, discovered the story in 2019 while cleaning out his grandmother's house after her death. He found Thomas's old ammunition pouch, still containing 1 modified cartridge, along with a faded photograph of Thomas in uniform. The grandson donated both items to the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. The museum accepted them, but has not yet displayed them. They remain in climate-controlled storage, catalogued but largely invisible. If this story moved you, if you believe that innovations like Thomas Begay's deserve to be remembered, hit that like button now. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep sharing these forgotten stories of courage and ingenuity. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you served or if someone in your family did. Tell us what you think about soldiers who break the rules to save lives. These stories disappear when we stop telling them. Your engagement keeps them alive. Thomas Begay was a mechanic, a father, a hunter, and a veteran. He was also an innovator who understood that survival in war sometimes requires breaking rules that make no sense on the battlefield. He never asked for recognition. He never sought glory. He just wanted to go home. And because of what he did in that cellar in France, 11 other men went home too. That's worth remembering.